Tuesdays, the bliss comes alive.
Welcome back, and we're moving into our conversation this morning with Carolyn Trench Sandiford. Of course, Carolyn is a consultant who works in planning and development, and we've had her on several times to talk about different issues, but today we're talking about ways in which we can revolutionize the idea of governance, but most importantly, looking at it from a results-based perspective. So we have with us, as I mentioned, Carolyn. Good morning. Thank you for being here.
Good morning, Marlene. Good morning, Isani. And as I said earlier, I will be renting a space on this podcast.
Well, we have been trying to keep the conversation going, and a very open conversation about the general concept of governance. Mm-hmm. Now, it has, and I've said this many times on the show, it becomes a buzzword that people almost dismiss at this point. Mm-hmm. But we've been breaking down different issues to leadership, looking at public servant, and now we're talking about getting results out of the governance system.
Yes.
So let me just start off with, you have actually created a white paper on this. Mm-hmm. What prompted you to do so?
It goes back to what you and Isani and Belize is talking about and has been talking about for a while. We keep having the conversation that something is wrong. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When you have a society and a country where poverty, social ills, crime and violence, where people are saying they no longer believe in the justice system, I think just as late as in your news. Mm-hmm. This week, last week Friday, you have this young lady, I think from Ladyville, she was saying nothing is going to happen, you don't believe. I was reading the Mandela this weekend, and if I may, I just wanted to quickly say something. It says, with each passing day, the people of Belize are seeing that we are living in a country which is hopelessly corrupt. Why is this so when our citizens, by large, are God-fearing and peace-loving? Belize is hopelessly corrupt because we Belizeans are the prisoners of a constitutional system of governance which is not dedicated in truth, honesty, and justice, but which was designed in the first instance to ensure that elective governments survive their 5-year term of office no matter what. And so here you have 2017. It's the same thing. It was here in 2000. It was here in the 90s. And people are saying we no longer believe in government. We no longer believe in Belize. We no longer believe in the system. And I think from that perspective, for me, I started to look at it from a why. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because oftentimes we have the conversation as to what is wrong, but we don't want to ask ourselves why. What is the root cause? Because we then, if we don't look at the root cause, then we start doing the band-aids. Yeah. Oh, this is wrong. There's a Senate hearing today. What is going to come of it? Oh, they're going to make some recommendations. And then that is going to happen. And then 10, 15 years ago, away from this, it's going to happen again. So going back to the why, I felt as a Belizean that I owe my country a duty. Mm-hmm. I have an obligation because of my knowledge and my skill set, but also because just prior we were discussing, I've traveled this country. I've literally been to every village, and we were just talking, I've been to every key. And so this is a country of wealth, of knowledge, and not only of people, but of natural resources. How is it that we can convert this into creating a Belize that is prosperous, that where everyone gets a just share of the wealth, which is safe, but more importantly, Marlena and Isani, that preserves the nation of Belize. Yeah. Because that is something that we tend to put also on the back burner. The whole concept of the preservation of Belize as a nation state. Because we are caught up in the everyday, but we are not thinking of Belize as a country. Where will Belize be in 10, 15 years? Yeah. And so then having done that, I wrote a paper, of course, called Revolutionizing Governance to Deliver a Prosperous, Just, Safe, and Secure Belize. And it argues that in order for us to create the Belize that we want, we must design the governance system to create that. And so it looks at the system of governance. How is it that we are where we are, the historical issues, the contemporary issues, and if we can then take that and say, this is where we are today, where do we want to go? And if where we want to go is whatever out there, then we start from today in redesigning that system, and that is what the paper is all about.
Two things that I'm looking at, and not to purposely be the devil's advocate here, but it's just a
the
matter.
devil's advocate is very important.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of looking at it from the point of view of someone else out there who may either be cynical at this point, because a lot has happened that we have no confidence in anymore, in anything for that matter.
Yes.
And secondly, would this to some extent be seen as a philosophical approach as opposed to something that could actually be tangible once it is put into place?
Two questions and I will respond to them. The first, yes, there is cynicism. The cynicism is there. And so it's very important then that we have the conversation, the open conversations, to start that and to change that cynicism. I am of the view that people want to see change. But what has been happening, they're not seeing the change that they want. And also because they have to live their everyday lives. So when I'm living my everyday life, it becomes a bit challenging and difficult for me to also be thinking, what is it that we can do to change the system of governance? But also, how does what is happening connect to what I do? So from that standpoint, the cynicism is going to be there, and it's up to individuals like myself, like the media, like all of us who believe that there is something that can happen, that can change what is happening now, to bring about this Belize that we want. If we all start thinking, and I believe everybody does, want to see this Belize that is going to be peaceful, that is going to be just, that is going to be safe. If we start thinking along that line, then we can start saying, what is it that we need to do? So yes, there is cynicism, but we have to find ways in which to overcome that cynicism, because we can't be anchored down by the pessimism and the cynicism. Belize is not going to go anywhere. And if we then move the conversation away from us and start thinking about our children and our grandchildren and asking ourselves, what is the Belize that we want to leave for them? Then the conversation starts to shift, because then you will begin to realize that I have to get up and do something if I am serious about that. From the philosophical standpoint, yes and no. Ideology is philosophical. And we have to recognize that government on a whole, if they are not anchored by philosophy and ideology, then we end up with the situation that we have. The reason Belize moved towards what we call the peaceful, constructive Belizean revolution in the 1950s was because there was a Belize where there was oppression, there was based on slavery and then colonization. The wealth of this nation was being expropriated. The people were living in poor conditions, and so on and so forth. So there was this movement towards creating a better life. The unfortunate thing that has happened, and I like to say, is that that peaceful, constructive Belizean revolution was derailed. In fact, I am of the view, and I will argue, that the Right Honorable George Price took us to, like Moses, to the land of milk and honey, but we were unable to convert that milk and honey for all the nation. And there is a fundamental reason for that. If you look at the constitution of our country, and you look at the preamble of that constitution, you're going to see where in George Price's thinking, he was looking towards a more egalitarian society, a society that where everyone was entitled to a share of the wealth, this great wealth. And there was a lot of programs that he took on: education reform, land reform. There is a reason why when you look at the poverty statistics, for example, and the wealth of the country, where you're going to see the North was traditionally and historically in a better position than the South. There's a reason for that: land reform. When they took the lands from the big landowners and went into the cane farmers acquiring their own land, land is wealth. And so there was some reform process. That has to be ideology, because if you're not anchored in that ideology, then what you will end up doing is creating a society and a system where it's every man for himself.
Which is what we have now.
Exactly.
And I wanted to, there's so many thoughts you've triggered in my mind at this point. We're going to try to be able to but the ideology is very important. We've never spoken about that. And If you look outside of Belize, which I think is important for us to be able to do, and you look at major political parties, if we move away from the word of ideology, you have an essence as to what political parties should represent.
Yes.
You have a knowledge as to what their long-term vision of whatever nation it is. And there's a very clear distinction.
Yes.
We have our manifestos in this country, which at this point, I dare to say that people dismiss.
Yes.
Because they're not necessarily followed up the way that we would want them to be.
Yes.
And I don't
It's
know
also
if
part
we
of the
know.
cynicism.
Yeah,
Yes.
but
it contributes to that.
It's like catch-22 because it's part of what has happened, and now that is the solution. But what I'm saying is, would that make a difference if we go back to looking at long-term visions for the country, to be able to be the platform that we see from the different political parties that are looking to lead the country? And two, do we have a society at this point in time that is prepared to accept and to look at the long-term vision as how we make our decisions for leadership?
I say yes and yes. And why do I say yes and yes? Simply because if we go back in history, it is not something that is new. That was exactly how this country has evolved and developed. It evolved on a long-term vision. There was a vision set for better quality of life. In setting that vision, they set some milestones to achieve that better quality of life. What was the first milestone? And this is a little history. Adult suffrage. Before you can talk about a better quality of life, you have to be able to vote. Yes? So that was the first. The second one became self-government. You have to be able to govern yourself. And the third was independence. But as I said, what transpired was that we reached this point, and it was almost as if, okay, what next? How do we move to the next step of creating this better quality of life? And what is this better quality of life? Now, if you look at our system of governance, and this is where we'll do a little history before we can move forward. Our governance system is tied into the United Kingdom governance system. If you recently was with the election the other day, you saw Theresa May won the election but did not win the majority.
That's right.
There is 650 members of parliament in the UK. They won 315, if I recall. So they had to partner with another political party in order to form the government. But whatever happens, there is a clear distinction between what is their legislature, their cabinet, and their judiciary. Their cabinet, for example, has 21 plus 1. So 22 persons make up a cabinet out of 315 or 300 representatives. So there can be no incestuous relationship. Now let us fast forward to our scenario. If you go back to the Political Reform Commission and you go back to some of the issues that people are saying are wrong about Belize, one of the key things people say there is that the legislature is just a rubber stamp for the executive. It is not an oversight. Your legislature is supposed to be your oversight. It supervises what is happening. It ensures that whatever you do is in compliance with what has been discussed and approved by the House. That is not happening in Belize, and that is why we have this relationship where we say there's this incestuous relationship between the cabinet and the House. Why? Every prime minister since independence has appointed more members of more than half of the House in the cabinet, so that when you go to the House, it's just a rubber stamp because we go by collective responsibility. So we say that yes, we are part of the parliamentary democracy system. We have copied it from the UK wholesale. Some of it has worked, some of it has not worked. What we need to do then is to dissect it and to understand what has worked for us and what has not worked, and how can it change the system of our governance. What can we do to it to ensure that we have each component of government doing the work that they ought to be doing. So when we start talking then about how we move forward, we need to start now doing what I call the drilling down. But even drilling down by itself, going back to how you started the conversation, even that drilling down by itself and also applying what we call those threads of good governance, effectiveness, efficiency, transparency, and so on and so forth. That by itself may reduce the corruption, but it does not address the issues of poverty and crime and those kinds of things. That is where your ideology comes in, because if you are someone based on some social justice ideology, as what the Right Honorable George Price based his entire revolution on, then you're going to see how that then speaks to how can I take the resources of government then and ensure that everybody gets a just share. One of the key resources of government, if we want to bring it down to the everyday life, land. Let us look at land. How many people are you here out there crying for land, want a piece of land to build their house, to create a little farm? I was out on the marine environment. The fisherman want a little land for put up a stuff. If we don't have a system that accommodates those people in an equitable way, in a fair way, those people will never get it. But you have to be anchored in that philosophy. Yeah. And so you go back then to the results that you spoke about. So if we know where we are today, where are we today? We say we have 43% poverty. Where do we want to be in 2025? At the same 43% poverty? No, we may want to be at 10% poverty. How do we get there? And that is where the results come in, because any new form of governance that you now move towards cannot be simply what I call the status quo, the accounting, going to the House of Representatives and just speaking, oh, last year we approved $1 billion, this is how we spend it. We don't want to hear just about how you spend it, where 1 + 1 is 2. We want to know what results you have achieved based on what you targeted.
But Carolyn, even some of our international conventions set out results similar to what you're speaking of. And my question to you is, how do we move from simply making or from announcing the goals that we set for ourselves to moving to actionable results? There's a political will that must come with that, but there is also a public pressure that must accompany it. And I don't say public pressure. People always think it means riot in the streets, but it simply means holding people accountable. And I feel sometimes that is where we are stuck. We're very good at analyzing the challenges. We look back on the past and we say, well, X did it, Y did it, Z will do it. And it will never change. And so we leave it as is. And we don't necessarily follow up to have the results that have been promised to us.
And that is where, moving forward, we have to rethink. And that's the point I'm making in my paper, to say that we've been doing all of this, having these great conversations and analyzing, but what is now the prescription? Let us, for argument's sake, as a country, we set goals. And when I say as a country, I am not speaking about a political party. There can be a process. That process can be led by civil society, it can be led by a political party. It is irrelevant in the scheme of things, but there must be a process where as a country we can say these are the things that we want to achieve. We've done it before. That's my point. We did it when the Right Honorable George Price started a movement. We did it. Now things have changed somewhat because we are no longer confined to what I call political party, political party. We now have a very strong civil society. And that role of the civil society has been expanding and evolving over time. It is because of the pressures of civil society that we have had all these inquiries and commissions and so on and so forth. I feel that there is a stronger role for civil society in terms of us moving forward, because I believe that where civil society is concerned, along with, not civil society by itself, along with the people of Belize, can hold the government accountable. But how do you hold the government accountable if you don't know what to hold them accountable to? This is where it's right. You have to know, how do you know what is how do I ask for transparency if the very legislation does not allow for transparency? And this is where I come to the prescription. But you can't go to the prescription unless you know what is wrong and what you want to do. Let us say, Marlena Isani, you go to the doctor, right? You have some ailment. You talk to the doctor, right? The doctor will say, in order for you to get better, let us use a simple thing, blood pressure. A lot of people trouble with blood pressure. Your blood pressure too high. In order for you move from here, because then have one thing, if you move from here to here, these are the things you have to do. You have to eat healthier, you have to take this medication. So they set the prescription and they said by such and such a time, your blood pressure is supposed to come down. We can apply that same to our government. We can apply it. We can say as a country, this is where we want to go. As a country, there are three key things, if I can summarize that goals that we need to look at, and I call them overarching. We need to look at the preservation of the nation state of Belize. We can't just talk ICJ. That is a strategy. You have to focus on the result you want, and it's when you know the result you want, then you engage a strategy. Because if I know I want to preserve the nation state of Belize, what is it that makes the nation state of Belize? Our Belizean identity, our borders, and so on, the rice and beans, and so on and so forth. Those are the things that make up Belize. So if I want to see the border 8,867 square miles by 2025, if I want to ensure that we still talk Creole and the English that we primary language, then I have to put things in place, because if you look at the statistics, Belize is changing.
Yes.
It is changing. So if I want to maintain that, these are the things I have to put in place to achieve that. Another overarching goal, eradicating poverty. 43%, that is where we are. What is it that we need to do to get there? If I am correlating poverty, let us say to one aspect, educational attainment. If there's a correlation between the higher your educational attainment, the more you're marketable and employable. So if I am only having 4% people coming out of tertiary institutions, yes, that means by such and such a time I want to see 50%. What is it that then I need to do? What's the prescription to getting there? You see where I'm going?
Yes.
The third one, the trust, and the third overarching that I would look at is restoring trust and confidence in our governance system. How do we do that? Yes, how do we? So that may require education. And I can go on and on and on to simply say that that is where you go to the results that you speak of, because it is no longer every year we go for a budget and this budget just speaks to 1 + 1 is 2, but rather the budget speaks to this is where we want to go, this is what this budget will achieve, and when you come back to report, you report on that.
Of the 3 points that you made, I am particularly interested in the third one, which speaks to governance, right? I look at the idea of political reform, for instance, as well as land reform. Two things that you mentioned in the earlier part of your discussion. The idea that for so long, since independence, we have been following what has worked in the UK parliamentary system to mixed results. For want of a better expression.
No, that's an excellent mixed results, because some things have worked and some have not.
My thing is, what would it take for both of the major political parties and of course the third parties to really sit down and look at tailoring something that fits for Belize? If we've practiced the parliamentary system of the United Kingdom to very mixed results, why don't we start looking at something that seriously works for our society, that every Belizean has an input in terms of the way we are governed? That is one thing. You also spoke about the issue of land reform, but really and truly there isn't really much of an equity in the distribution of land across the country. You have people who can, to an extent, afford to purchase a piece of land and own a piece of Belize as their birthright. And then you have others who, come hell or high water, they won't get that because they don't know the people in power, they don't know the people in the right places, and all the wheeling and dealing that has to do with purchasing or owning a piece of land. So the idea of land reform as well, for me, is something serious to consider, because I would want to think that when we are born as Belizeans, that we are entitled to part of the country that we live in.
You can only be anchored to your country if you're anchored to the land, if you have a love for your land. Now, you spoke earlier regarding the political parties coming together. I don't believe that that's impossible. I think it's highly likely. Why do I say that? I have seen where both the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition have signed on to have built consensus on going forward on a particular area. If I can point specifically, I think you have the children's agenda that was recently launched. But it took a civil society organization to pull it together and do the presentation. And this is why I say, because of the cynicism, again, when I keep saying that if we focus on the result rather than the strategy, then we start asking ourselves what can work, can not work. The cynicism may not necessarily be eroded or decreased if a political party puts out something. But perhaps if the civil society puts out something, then the nation may feel a little better because it's not coming from the political parties, and challenge the political parties to sign on to it. It has happened, so it's not that it cannot happen before. So from that standpoint, in terms of the land reform, there is a key educational there's a key educational component that is required in building any new governance system. It never happened in our first, what I call our first era. But we are only 36 years old this year, you know. Let us not get out there. And these are exciting times. Because think about yourself being 20 odd, 30 odd, you're the rethink life, we are only 36, we're getting our footing. And it's a good time, it's an exciting time for all of us, because now we can start saying, what is the Belize we want to leave for the next generation? And if it's a Belize where we want our Belize people to be anchored to this land, then we must start looking at the land distribution process. We have never had in this country a land policy articulated as to say who get land, what are the criteria for get land, how much land they forget. What that has resulted in, and if you can go to the statistics and the data coming out of natural resources, you're going to see a minuscule amount of people own the majority of the land in this country. Why is it that you can get 5,000 acres of land and I can't get a lot, right? That is the lack of a policy. And then remember, go back to the ideology. If you don't have a political party that is in government that is going to say, you know what? Every Belizean ought to get a piece of land, but not only say it in the manifesto, like you said, but put the process in place. But that start to talk about power. Because remember now, nobody gives up power, right? So it is going to take away some of the power of certain people, because they will no longer put their name on something and make sure you get. But if the people are going to demand this and say, this is what we want, then the politicians will have to follow the dictate of the people. And land reform is, to my mind, land reform is more important than it shouldn't say more, but it is as important as the immigration and nationality.
Yes.
Because when I can tell you, and this was just a throwing out, we recently did some analyses of some lands on the coast. And when you start looking at the amount of settlements that are now burgeoning on the coast, which are catering to foreign nationals, people start asking who the land for anymore. But are these foreign nationals Belizeans? We say foreign, but are they Belizeans? And so you have to start asking yourself, what is the prescription? And I think that is where, going back to what Marlene started with the results, if you know where you want to go, then you start to put the prescription in place to get there. And it can happen.
And fundamentally, I think, and we still go back to it, that it takes two elements to really be able to get there. It is having a demand and the willingness to supply.
That's right.
Now, I want to talk about this from one particular area. And I think it is hard for us to have this conversation. I mean, you start speaking of land, and I know the people at home who are saying, listen, man, we just did this case in the news and that case in the news, and we talked that small percentage, and politically affiliated, directly and indirectly, persons who have been able to amass quite a bit of natural resources, a lot of wealth as well. And we know how it has happened. And then somebody goes in, no name, no status, hardworking, and is taken through a drawn-out process, maybe with or without results.
Yeah.
When we are at that particular stage, it is difficult for anybody else from the outside to say, I'm even going to go take a chance.
Yes.
And it is questionable whether the system itself will change to cater to them. Because we know, even as we've seen with the current inquiry, that even the public officers have fallen into the system as well.
Yes, over time, everybody fall into...
Yeah, so it has almost become more informal system as to how things get done. So if you are looking at an analysis of where we are now and moving from this point forward, what would be the first actionable step? Where does it come from?
I think one of the actionable step in my mind has to come from the people and perhaps the ones who are more organized, which come, and I go back to the role of civil society within this thing. But there are certain key things that can happen now without having the big picture down the road. One key thing, for example, we spoke about governance, and that has been the thread of your conversations on this job. If I point to the question of transparency in governance and accountability, one of the first things I would want to ask, and we use land as an example.
Everybody wants their land.
I want the Minister of Natural Resources to put a statement on the House as to the lands that all the lands that have been issued over a certain period of time, how much acres, etc., and so on and so forth. That starts the conversation, because then that is what you call accountability. But when has this nation received a report from the Minister of Natural Resources that says, when I took over the ministry, Belize has 8,867 square miles. Of that, 4,000 are in private hands, 4,300 and whatever is in national hands. Of this 4,300 and so, for the year 2008, 2009, I issued 1,000 acres, and these are the names. Have you seen that? That is transparency. So those are the things that you can start doing immediately. In terms of education is another thing. If we say education is the means by which we empower our people and empower the next generation. When it took the IDB, for example, to come in and produce a report that said we are not getting quality for the investment, why is it that we're not having value for money? That is another thing we can start demanding immediately. We don't need to even go to national goals yet. We can start now demanding that the current government and any government that comes start presenting these reports into the House that say what it is you did with our resources. The resource of this country in terms of education has to be expanded. We need to appreciate that when they go to the House of Representatives, that they only talk to us about money. Yes? Money is neither here nor there. The wealth of this country is in the land. You hear me? It's in the land. And until we grasp that, to understand that the land is the wealth, then we're going to demand that they respond to us. What are you doing with the wealth of this country? If I am talking about preserving this country, I want the Minister of Defense to get up and tell this nation, we have this amount of miles of border. How are you defending that border? We are not having those conversations. So those would be, Marlene, the first things that you start. I call it the low-hanging fruit. Things that can happen now. And in the meantime, what you would want to happen now is that, like the civil society, that to start organized. They are organized there in the Senate.
Let me push a little further with this one. There's a very interesting dynamic in this country. You know, Belizeans, we love this country.
Oh, of course we do.
Love this country.
I have no doubt we do.
And my biggest concern is that we don't necessarily, I don't know if we show the pride for the country that we should. I'll probably be crucified for that. But I feel that when we talk about civic pride and public participation, it is not something that is very evident in our society at this time. And I want to take it back to looking at just a psychological term. When we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for example, if we talk about people who are lacking the basics, if I need to be concerned about paying my rent for the
Yes.
roof over my head, the school fees that are coming up for the children that I know I can't afford, I'll go for my annual loan from one of the institutions to cover what should be basic
Yes.
care for my children. I still
Yes.
can't provide the healthy food for them. They probably stay home without a babysitter or without me there because I need to work. When I have these issues to be able, and these are major battles to
Yes,
parents,
every day.
if I have to battle that every day, quite frankly, I don't have time to go and tell the
Yes.
land minister to do his job or to tell X to do his job because I need to make sure my child goes to school and has food. So it is difficult to be able to get to one.
It's like a chicken and egg.
Yeah, and that's what
It's
I'm
like a
getting at.
chicken
We're
and
talking
egg,
about
yes.
43%
Yes,
of the
it's a
country.
chicken and egg.
And it's very fair to them to understand. Listen, please make sure your child eats.
Yeah.
That is fundamental.
Yeah.
But we also need these people to
And
be
you,
a part
because
of the momentum.
you're tied into your day-to-day, and I quite agree with you, Marlena, and that is that's why I say it's like a chicken and egg. Every day I have to get up to find the money to feed my kids, to take them to school, etc., etc. So my day is tied into that. The other side of that is that every day my child see me doing that. Every day Wednesday my child see me going to the minister to get one hands out. When the child grow up, what do you think the child can do? He want to do the same thing.
Because you're
And that's
creating a
how you
culture of
perpetuate.
dependency.
And then it goes, so it goes back to one of the points which started the Mandela discussion and the whole historical. If we understand the concept coming out of slavery and colonization, that was how your governance structure was set up. Your governance structure was not set up to create an egalitarian society. Now George Price, in his social justice mind, came up and started talking about that is the kind of society that we ought to have. Belize has been changing and shifting over time. Where are we now in terms of our values? Where are we now in terms of the role of our diaspora? That has become another great conversation. The role of, but we can't talk to the diaspora about a role unless we know where we want to go and take this country. How do you deal with the chicken and egg? It's a combination of things happening parallel. It can't be one thing happening. You spoke earlier about governance and leadership. Leadership is very key because when you have leaders who are visionary and leaders who understand and appreciate the importance of setting goals for a country, then that leadership then marries with the people and the movement. So you're able to then convince and inspire and motivate. What is happening now in Belize, as far as I'm seeing, I am not seeing no Belizeans being inspired and motivated as to where they want to go. But you can only motivate and inspire and bring around a people if you can give them hope. My great-grandmother, I always go back and use her as an example, and I may have done it on this show already. She said when she joined that movement, she kept seeing that what was going to happen with her children and her great-grandchildren. She come from Shiboon. She had no education. But she knew that this revolution may bring for she children and for she grandchildren. So she was prepared to, when the call came out, even though they wrong a pat or the wash or whatever, they were run out there when that call came. It is but a leadership. Yes. So it's a combination of leadership and vision. It's a combination also of how you communicate. And sometimes even I have to be honest, sometimes I have to remember, hey, don't be too technical. You know, it's how you communicate because you need to be able to link what is happening to that daily life of that person. That person need to know, right, even though today I struggle for pay my bills today, tomorrow it will be different for my children if I do this or if I subscribe to this. And then the messengers, as you have said, there's cynicism. There are people not believe in political parties anymore. What distinguishes one from the other? It's not there. So even those political parties need to sit back. I have often said to the party which I am a member, you need to sit back and reflect and rethink where we are today.
And times are different. Yes.
I maintain the peaceful construction, believe the revolution is over. Do you all know anything about it?
Well, we do from what
But
we learned
you
in
want
history.
to-
But
historical
how
context.
relevant is it
No,
today?
right.
Yes.
It's over. It is
Today
time
we're
to move
fighting
into a
bread and
more
butter issues.
progressive
Yeah.
change and reform revolution, one that is going to bring about the results. What is the results
Yeah.
we want for this country? And that is when you start talking about pulling the country together.
Carolyn, you know what I appreciate? That you are able to still remain optimism even in presenting this. I say it very honestly because it is difficult, even from the media standpoint, it is difficult because you focus on the negative, you're anti-government. You focus on the positive, you're pro-government. And if when you look towards the future with a very critical sense of what has happened in the past of the country, not the parties, the past of the country, it is very easy to lose hope. But what you are saying is that what we do have in place is workable.
That's right.
And there are changes that we have to make along the way, but it will require us demanding those changes, and it will require the political will of the leadership that we choose.
That's right.
To be able to do so as well.
And I don't want to just say changes, I want to say progressive, radical changes. Because oftentimes we are caught up in the status quo. We want to tinker. If we are going to create the Belize that was set out for us and the Belize that we want, then it has to be radical transformation. And that in itself will take, buying in and getting the people on board.
Well, we're approaching 36, close to 40. I think most people, when they're getting around 40, is trying to solidify what they want to be. That's what we're doing as well.
Yes.
Thank you for being a part of our governance series and having this conversation this
You
morning.
are welcome anytime, and as I said, I will pay my rent.
Is there any way people can access your white paper that you
Oh,
have produced?
certainly. What I will be doing, I'll be posting it on my Facebook page.
Okay.
And what I'll also be doing is sharing with NGOs, NGO community, and people at large, so that people can read it, and perhaps it can be the start of a discussion and how we can move forward. I always believe whatever you want to do, start with something. And from there, the discussion can start.
All right. Thank you very much. We're going to go ahead and take a break. We have another important conversation coming up. Women's Empowerment. There's a seminar coming up on July 29th. We'll be joined by the organizer, Annie Palacio, and one of the, I would believe, moderators, Audrey Matura. So that's coming up after the break, so stay tuned.